Hi everyone, my name is Pooja and I am one of the co-founders of here at Onero. Today we're going to have a discussion about law careers in UK and we are here to answer basically every question that you have about studying in UK as an international student, especially if you're interested in a law degree. We have with us Jonathan Saunders, who is a Cambridge graduate himself. He will be proceeding with his master's in Oxford starting this year. And he has also guided over 140 students to their um, law degrees in UK. He has been a coach to a lot of students on their LNAT journey, on their college listing and essay writing journey. And yeah, so we are all ears for all the questions that you have. And I think we're going to start now. Arslan, over to you.
Thank you, Pooja. All right, welcome guys. Welcome everyone to a new webinar that we've been started a few months ago. Uh, let's just dive into what we have planned for you today, and we can begin. Just to give a quick introduction to who we are and what do we do. So we are Onero Education, as you would know, because you're here for the webinar. So I am one of the co-founders along with Pooja here. And we specialize in guiding students right from middle school to high school to even undergraduate students get into universities, the dream universities, through their profile building, career guidance, and ultimately applications. So we guide them with everything here, right? And to talk about a little bit of what we have done so far and what we have achieved. We've got students across almost all countries where students have been admitted to the top schools, top 10, top 50, top 100 schools around the world. And we've had good success uh, in our previous years, right? Moving on to the webinar and our guest speaker today, that's Jonathan. As Pooja rightly said, and has already given a quick introduction to Jonathan. I would like, Jonathan, why don't you just speak a little bit about yourself and give our audience a little bit idea about that.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jonathan Saunders. I've just finished my law degree at Cambridge, and next year I'll be moving on to Oxford to do my master's degree there before going into practice. So for the last 3 years, I have supported students for applications to universities, mainly Oxbridge, specialising in law applications. So I do quite a lot of my work through my old school where I'm head of the Oxbridge admissions process there. And we have, about 40 or 50 students that we support each year. And most of those look to take the LNAT test, which is a key test that needs to be taken to study law in the UK. Not all universities require it, but the vast majority of the top ones, including Oxford and Cambridge, do. So I'm here to answer your questions. And yeah, we hope this webinar is going to be informative for you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for agreeing for the webinar. That I think it will be a good introduction to law in UK because as we keep going every year by year, we keep getting students those who are wanting to practice law, and there's a whole conversation and confusion that goes around with students when they are thinking about law, because the general idea in India is that law is something that you're doing from the country because law of the land. So you need to study within the country. So very few students do understand that you can pursue law outside India and what are the differences, but they don't go into too much detail because the information is not very clear. So I hope we are able to convey that today and explain and give a good understanding of what law is in UK and what is the difference between doing it from India and you do it from UK. And if you plan to stay back in UK or plan to come back to India, we try to capture all those points, right? With that, I would like to start with the flow of the webinar, how we are going to go with it and what we are trying to cover here. I basically gave an idea of that, but just to talk about it a little bit more, right? So first and foremost, why not study from India and why study from UK? The big question, that why should a student just not pursue CLAT, that is the Indian paper for law in India, and instead take on a university in UK? With that, the big next question comes that if you do study from UK, what are the opportunities? Because that is something that has become, talk of the conversations everywhere these days because of the immigration, so because of the laws changing, because of countries' restrictions around the world, and not just UK. UK has always had a certain restrictions to immigration and PR. But along with that, what are the options that are there? Because if somebody is going to spend 3 years studying law in UK, what are the things that they can hope for? That becomes a very important question, right? So we hope to cover that as well. Then obviously we'll pass it on to Jonathan to talk about how exactly do you apply? What does it mean to have a statement of purpose? What does it mean to have a certain activities? What does it mean to go through LNAT or not go through LNAT for that matter? Because there are different routes to even applying to UK. So Jonathan will be taking care of that. And then we also talk a little bit about the visa possibilities, that what exactly happens according to the new rules of PSW. That is the graduate route after you finish your graduation in UK. How do you get the jobs or do stay back in UK, right? And with that, we also talk a little bit about how are we going to practice law in UK and UK, right? So this is something that we are trying to cover here, and I think we can begin. Now, talking about I think this is something because we keep taking students from from Indian school systems where students are always confused about. So I think I'll start off with why exactly you should take up law in UK and what is the basic difference that comes from India. And coming from a law background myself, I do realize the whole question that surrounds it, the whole bubble that is there around studying in India and studying abroad. I think I would like to start with the very first factor, and this goes without saying, the rankings of the universities or the prestige of the universities that is there in UK, right from Oxbridge to every other university like Bristol and other universities there. But talking more specifically to why to choose law from doing law from UK. Uh, First of the very prime features and a factor that I would like to mention is that when you're studying law in India, the first thing that you need to keep in mind that you have to do it for either for 6 years or for 5 years. There is no other way. You have to finish a graduation, and graduation in the current times, according to the new education policy, has turned to 4 years. That's 4 years plus 3 years of your LLB. That makes it 7 years. Now that's a huge chunk of time that goes into studying law and finishing it. Now that comes with a huge difference that if you apply to UK universities and you do your LLB from there, you do not need to go through an entire graduation to be able to apply to this. Bar Council of India has actually given around 22 universities in UK itself, which are recognized. So if you do apply to universities in UK, you will be able to finish your LLB in 3 years instead of the 5-7 years that it would require to study in India. And on top of that, the prestige that you get in studying from an international university, getting that exposure, getting that network, getting those specific work experiences and otherwise life experiences. That goes without saying, that comes with going abroad and studying and changing your, you have studied for 10, 12 years in a system, and then changing that system expands your horizon. So that becomes a very big factor, and the recognition that goes along with that. So I think this is the basic feature or basic reason why, if somebody wants to choose, should choose UK. The time period that it takes. Right? Now, to talk about the application process and a little bit more into what goes around in UK and what goes around in the universities while people are studying, I think Jonathan would be able to answer that way better than us, because our knowledge is limited that way, and Jonathan is somebody who's just finished. So Jonathan, why don't you walk us through a little bit about what is exactly that is required for a student to go through the profile, the entire works of it.
Great, thank you. So when you're applying for a law degree in the UK, the places are competitive. So the first thing is to make sure that your grades are up there, all the way up there, because most students will be applying with the top grades. And so you really need that to get your foot through the door. But once you've secured that, after you've finished your studies, then there are other things you can do to set yourself apart. And one key thing is the LNAT test. So the LNAT is a two-part test. The first is multiple choice questions, and the second is an essay component. And both are equally important, but different universities might put different weight on each of section A and section B. So section A, the multiple choice test is tricky. As you see on the slide, the average is 20 out of 42. The average for a successful Oxbridge applicant is 27 out of 42. So it is hard. And lots of universities place a lot of weighting on this and just do a straight cutoff of if an applicant gets below a certain mark, they won't be considered further in the process. But then other universities, so particularly Oxford and Cambridge, they place a lot of weight on the essay component as well, because they don't just want to see a number on the page for how well you did, they want to see your style of writing. And that's something that can come across through both the essay and the LNAT and the personal statement. So these should both be seen as opportunities to demonstrate that you have an academic grasp on the law or on contentious topics, moral topics generally. So you don't need specific legal knowledge to do well in the LNAT or your personal statement. You need to show you've got a critical mindset. And that's really where the individual flair can come through. And that's something that top universities really look for. So the LNAT and the personal statement are two crucial components there that shape and sculpt your application to make it personal, individual to you. I'll hand back over to you, Aslan, the rest of it.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. I think Pooja will be able to comment on this a little bit more, because working with students with personal statements and the differences that comes with general SOPs that you're working with otherwise universities in UK, and the process of how you're going towards law and if you're applying towards law. Pooja, why don't you walk us through a little bit about the process of how do you exactly start with the work and the specific grades and everything that is otherwise also required, adding on to what Jonathan has just said.
Right. Thank you so much. So, like Jonathan said, first of all, grades, and they really have to be up there. So, across different boards, the kind of marks that we have seen are that if you are, let's say, in CBSE board with scores you on 100-point scale, then mostly the people who are applying for Oxford or Cambridge are up there at 95% in their 10th grade and their 12th grade boards exams scores. The same goes for students from Cambridge. Their high school scores, the minimum that you will need for a top 10 UK university is going to be AAA. For a lot of students, it is A star, A star, A as well. Right? So that is where your marks need to be. Coming to courses, there is no specific requirement for courses, but it really helps if you have studied history, political science, English writing, because that gives you the ability to make very strong arguments and think everything through before you answer. So the kind of analytical ability that you need is something that these theoretical courses are going to provide. Otherwise, there is no specific law-based knowledge that you need to have. But yes, this process, LNAT as well as the interview, is going to test how you reason through an argument, how you decide which side to stand on in an issue. So that is something that you need to think about before you appear for the test and the interview. Now, coming to the personal statement, LNAT, because Jonathan has covered that, and he will be speaking about that more. For the personal statement, you get 4,000 characters, which comes down to basically one page if you translate that into words. The criteria is very strict for the word length. There is no prompt or brief that you get for any UCAS materials. You have to very simply start with talking about your Arslan, I think you can move to the next slide. There are some points on that slide as well. We'll come back to this one. Right. So for the personal statement, it has to be very academic and it has to be very straightforward. Unlike the documents that you will be submitting for your US applications, just in case any of you is looking into US applications, right? A lot of creative writing is required. But the UCAS statement does not demand you to be very creative. What it wants from you is that you're very straightforward and very direct about your experiences and motivations. The reason why you have chosen this major And that goes for all courses, not just law, but any UCAS application that you're filling. The statement of purpose has to be exactly that, a statement of purpose. So which books inspired you, which movies inspired you, which events in your personal life motivated you to look further into this particular domain. Now, one particular thing about law aspirants, especially in the post-COVID lives that we are living, a lot of students have taken inspiration for law from TV shows. There are so many fantastic, enjoyable TV shows. I've personally binge watched How to Get Away with Murder just last month. And the way you view, the way you perceive law when you're looking at them on a TV show, unfortunately, is very, very different than how they are in real life. So when you're talking about books or activities or shows or films that have inspired you, you really need to engage with those materials very, very thoroughly. And you have to look at the entertainment value versus the knowledge value of the materials that you are citing. So you need to be very clear about that. You can be whimsical in your inspiration, you can be very playful in your writing, but there needs to be some solid ground for your motivation. This is one area that you need to put in a lot of work before you submit your applications. The next most important part is that all your activities in the last 4 years of high school need to be listed down in your personal statement in a very conversational manner. And you need to show what did these activities give you? What did these activities, how did these activities impact you? So, for example, if you've been a classical dancer for the last 9 years and you've cleared the exams for classical dance and you've given a lot of stage performances, how do you really link that to your career in law, right? Think about how it has shaped you as a person. Has it made you very perseverant? Has it taught you the value of hard work and practice? Has it taught you to never give up? And has it been a creative outlet for you? Yes, then those things need to go in your applications. More than your achievements, what you need to focus on is what these achievements left you with, how they changed you as a person, how they helped you evolve as a person. So it's not just about counting the medals, because that all of that can be covered in your letter of recommendation that your counselor is going to write for you. Right? So we have that. Arslan, can we please move back to the previous slide? There were a few more things there. Right. So that's about the personal statement. The next will be your interview. Now for interview, there are no specific questions. There is no recommended list of ideas or questions that you need to engage with. But uh, there are still materials available. Both Oxford and Cambridge have released a few mock interview tapes. There is also a lot of advice available on student forums that you can go through. Jonathan, I would like you to speak about interviews if there is any point that you would like to mention here.
Yeah, so I think the key thing to understand about Oxbridge interviews is they're not going to be like interviews you may have done before for, say, a job application. So in a job application, it's very much a Q&A type format, and you're providing information to your interviewer. But with Oxbridge interviews, they want it to be a conversation. They want you to learn something in that interview. They structure the interviews so that it's a mock tutorial, so a mock lesson essentially, to see how well you're able to fare in that sort of environment. So you will be asked questions, of course, but it's to get you to think, it's to get you to understand the law. And ultimately, the students who perform best in the interviews are those who came out having enjoyed it and having learned something. And if you learn something in an interview setting, then you'll do well. And so that's really how they gauge, whether you're going to be a good fit for the university or not. So it's about having a learning experience and having a conversation with your interviewer, who might end up, being your teacher at university. So it's about getting along and learning stuff together.
Right, that's very, very important. And this brings us to two more points. I'll go through them again. Number one, when you're applying to Oxford and Cambridge, you have to choose one of the two. You cannot put in an application for both, which is what gave birth to the term Oxbridge. Both of these colleges, they are in agreement that each student can apply to either one of these. So you will have to thoroughly understand where is it that you want to end up through this journey. That's one. And number two, your your UCAS account that you will be making very soon to put in your UK applications, right? With UCAS, you can apply to only 5 colleges in one go. So you have to select your 5 colleges, and in all 5 of those, you will be putting your application for the same course. So it is going to be for LLB only. You will not be able to put your application for a lot of different courses. Why? Because you will give the same statement of purpose and the same letter of recommendation will go from your school, and it is going to talk about you in a certain manner. If you're applying for law, it is going to talk about your abilities to succeed as a law student. Or if you're applying for management or finance or anything like computer science, right? So your UCAS application materials are going to talk about you from the perspective of you succeeding in that particular field. So it does not make sense to apply to 5 different courses in 5 different colleges. The course remains the same, but 5 different colleges you can apply to in one go. And you will start receiving your results for each one of them one by one. What happens when you get multiple offers and what happens when you don't get any offers? We will discuss that as well. First of all, let's take a look at the deadlines. So for the UK applications will open very soon. Right now, you can create your UCAS account. The first deadline that you will see is the Oxbridge deadline for all courses. It has to be 15th of October. For some other courses as well, like medicine, you have to put in your application by 15th of October, number one. Number two, for your test registrations, you have the timeline of 15th August till 4th October. In this timeline here, uh, you can apply for your tests. Giving the test, well, that happens between the 1st of September to middle of January. If you are applying for Oxbridge, you need to check Oxbridge requirements for your testing dates. If you're applying to other universities, which will be open all the way till mid-January, and some will be open even beyond that. After mid-January, universities start to close their seats on the basis of the requirements, on the basis of availability, right? So test dates, you will have to keep in mind what your universities are asking for. And then interview calls start coming from January onwards. So once the early universities with early deadlines have started to shortlist the students, that's when the interview calls start. So yeah, typically offers start to roll out by mid-January. Now, if you get acceptance from, let's say, 3 out of 5 universities or 5 out of 5 universities on your list, you will have the option of blocking those universities on your UCAS, and you can have one firm choice and one backup insurance choice just in case something goes wrong and you're not able to meet the criteria for your firm choice for your first choice, right? And just in case if you are not able to get into any of the 5 universities, later on you will see the option of UCAS clearing, which means all the seats that are left in various universities will be open for you to choose from, and that is when you can once again try getting into a UK college. Jonathan, is there anything that we can add to this process? Any point that I'm missing?
Yeah, so the one thing I wanted to add was about the LNAT test dates. So as you can see in the top right of the deadline section, you can take it any time between September and mid-January. But the caveat to that is you must take it before you apply on UCAS. So if you are going to apply to Oxbridge and your deadline is mid-October, then you must have taken the LNAT before mid-October. So if you take it in November or December, then you'll be in the later deadline season for the non-Oxbridge universities. So the key thing is if you're doing the LNAT, if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, 15th of October is the latest date you can take it. And so you've got that 6-week window there to take it.
Right. That's correct. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Aslan, we can move on to the next slide and cover the remaining criteria. I'll very quickly cover the IELTS. The IELTS is going to be mandatory for all international students. It is a test of language proficiency that you must submit to the university. The validity of IELTS is 18 months. So you can take it right before you submit your UCAS application. It's always better to do that. Sometimes universities will allow you to send in your IELTS a little later, but I don't really see a point in that. For most high schoolers, August, September, October, these are the months where you can very easily take this test instead of stalling it for later. And overall, for students who have studied in English medium, who have an English medium education, IELTS is not really a very big challenge. Just in case if you have to apply the next year, if things don't go right for you this year, your IELTS score will still be valid. So please register for IELTS and take it between August till 15th of October and be done with this criteria. Right? That's one. The next is letter of recommendation. I'll quickly cover that as well. All the parts of your profile, your activity list, your extracurriculars, and your performance in school, plus your marks and how participative you have been in your class and in different courses, is what will get covered through letter of recommendation. Your school counselor will be writing this for you. But in some schools in India, there is no concept of a school counselor, and that might be true for other schools as well across the world. In that case, your school's principal or vice principal can also write this letter for you. Very rarely, students take a letter from their subject teacher. But mostly what is recommended is that you take your LOR from your school counselor. Now, why is this letter so very important? All the internships, activities, certificates, medals that you have gained in the last 4 years of high school and throughout your school history, you will not be able to show any of this in your UCAS application. You will not be able to show this directly to the committees, right? Your school counselor is going to write about these achievements in a lot of detail with a lot of illustrations to, show you in a very good light to the admissions committees. And that letter is what is the truth for the admissions committees. So you need to take this very seriously. Right now is a very good time to, if you are in 12th grade, this is the right time for you to approach your counselor and request the letter of recommendation after you discuss your higher education plans with them. And your school will be giving you a brag sheet to fill, which is going to be nothing but a record of all the things you want the teachers to mention in your letter of recommendation. Please fill it very thoroughly. Please highlight all your achievements that you have done. Bring out all your certificates and all your medals and everything. Go through all of it and make sure that all of that is mentioned in your letter of recommendations, right? Now with this, I want to discuss with you, Jonathan, the extracurricular activities. And if you could give us a few examples of the kind of things you had in your profile before applying to university, and maybe a few examples from the people around you so that the students here get a better idea of how they can build their profile, especially the younger students from grade 10th or grade 11th who might be with us in the room here.
Okay, great. So I think with extracurriculars, the thing to recognize at the start is that there are two types of extracurricular activities. So the first you might call your typical extracurricular activity. So music, sport, dance, that sort of thing. These are good to include in the personal statement, but they're not the focus. So the second type of extracurricular activities is the academic ones. So books that you've read, lectures you've watched, kind of legal lectures. So this sort of academic engagement with law is the main thing you need to focus on in your personal statement. So to give a few examples, there are some really interesting books on international law. You might watch lectures or explanatory videos on current world legal issues. So, I'm sure many of you are aware of the Israel-Gaza conflict in the moment. So there'll be lots of explanatory videos on the international legal dimension of that and of many other conflicts and issues around the world. And it's engaging with real life events through a legal perspective that they really want to see in your personal statement. So yeah, it's these two types of extracurricular activities, but your focus should certainly be on the academic extracurriculars.
Right.
Actually, I would actually want to ask this one point here. Now, understanding that to show the critical aspect that we were just talking about, Jonathan, and you had mentioned that the critical knowledge of or analytical knowledge of the law needs to be something that needs to portray on your applications. Can you just talk a little bit more about when you say that it needs to be more academic? Do you reckon that it should be in forms of published papers, or some articles on obviously on the levels of what students can do in their high schools, which is actually quite advanced now. So what exactly pertains to the academic aspect of this extracurriculars?
Yeah, so students wouldn't be expected to publish their own articles at all at this point, but they might read other published articles to get a unique perspective on a particular legal issue. So, for example, when I was writing my personal statement, I read a really interesting article about a particular case. I won't go into the details of it at the moment, but the key thing to understand about that case is that the court eventually prioritized an individual's physical health over their mental health. So you might read that and understand it, and then to engage with it on an extracurricular level, kind of a more critical level, you might, contemplate whether that same result might be reached today. 30 years ago, yes, mental health might not have been taken that seriously in the courts, but is that true today? So it's about extrapolating the ideas, contemplating whether they're still valid or whether we might reach a different result today. So reading books, reading articles, reading kind of explanatory notes or lectures online, these are the sort of academic content you should be engaging with.
All right. I think that actually explains the specific factor of the academic part. Pooja, over to you.
We can move to the next slide.
All right.
Okay, so Jonathan, this is the time for us to dive deeper into LNAT. And to begin with, I will clarify something. There are two kinds of lists that students need to be aware of. The first is the list of universities which say that LNAT is a mandatory requirement for them. That means you cannot apply without the LNAT. And the second list is the list of approved colleges as per your country. So our context is Indian context, and for us, the Bar Council approves a certain list, has a certain list of approved colleges in UK. So if you get your degrees from here, you can come back and practice with relative ease. And we will be discussing the criteria for that in the next few slides. But yeah, you need to be very sure that you know which universities you are applying to. Number one. Number two, whether should you be taking the LNAT or not? How important is it, even if you want to apply in the list beyond the list that we have on the screen? What really happens in that case? So, Jonathan, I want you to take this up and explain this to the audience here. Why taking LNAT or not taking LNAT, and how is it going to impact your outcomes?
Right. So I think most students take the LNAT. So I think that has to be your starting point, the expectation that you probably will need to take the LNAT at some point. And as you can see from that left-hand list, almost all of the top UK universities require the LNAT. So Cambridge, Oxford, King's, Durham, they all require it. And it's only growing more popular. Up until a few years ago, Cambridge had its own specific admissions test called the Cambridge Law Test, but they've since abandoned that in favour of the LNAT. So more and more universities are requiring it because it is a difficult and prestigious test to do well in. So when you're considering which universities to apply to, I wouldn't recommend that someone applies to 5 LNAT universities. Because of course there is a risk that you might not do as well on the day as you want. So maybe having a 3-2 or a 4-1 split, so you do have some sort of backup if the LNAT doesn't go too well, that sort of split might be sensible. So coming on to consider what is the LNAT. So we've got section A and section B. So you might think section A sounds easy. It's multiple choice questions. You might have done those in school before, but it's really not. It's a very different type of multiple choice test. So at school, with the multiple choice tests you've done, there might have been 1 correct answer and 4 answers that were obviously incorrect. With the LNAT, all of the 5 answers are correct-ish. They're roughly right, but there's one that's going to be the most correct, the most accurate answer for that question. So it's that level of nuance that comes in the LNAT multiple choice questions that makes it so hard. And so it really is quite difficult. And usually I found that students prepare for 2 to 3 months before taking this LNAT test. And that's the sort of time frame that you'd need to do well in it. But you don't need any legal knowledge at all. It's just about your understanding of texts that are given to you. Essentially, it's a very difficult comprehension task, section A. So that's section A. Section B, again, doesn't require any legal knowledge at all. You'll be given a choice of 3 questions about moral, ethical, legal topics generally, and then you'll be expected to give an insightful answer to it. So one question might be, protests should never be allowed, discuss. So you don't need to know the detail of any protest laws. You need to give an informed opinion on that issue with knowledge you already have. So it's not testing your knowledge, it's testing your ability to answer critically and formulate an argument. So as I say, section B is not too long, it's about 600 words. And Oxbridge and Durham usually pay a bit more attention to it. So it's worth doing very, very well. And in terms of the time splits, the overall thing is 2 hours 15. You get 95 minutes, so just over an hour and a half for section A, and a short 40 minutes for section B. So you've got to be kind of on your toes and ready to go with your arguments and your critical thinking. It's quite a time-pressured test, which is why students usually need 2 to 3 months to prep for it, because it is quite.
Right. Okay. Yeah, all right. Thank you. So, learning about this thing that not all 5 colleges should be LNAT colleges was in fact enlightening for me as well. It's a very good point to know that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So, yeah, and we can move on. Okay, so now the next big thing, a part of the process that is going to start right now for all the applicants, and that is going to go on till the very end. How do you select the right universities? How do you make sure that you know that you are ending up at the right place, right? To think about the long list and the short list of universities, right? What I recommend to all my students always is that, first of all, create a sheet, create an Excel sheet on your computer, or maybe if you want in your journal, and write down all the colleges that you know of, all the colleges that you have heard the names of, and things you could possibly qualify for, right? So there are no boundaries here when we are creating the long list. Now, how do you start narrowing it down? First of all, you're going to look at the grades and you're going to match your grades with the university requirements. Now, a lot of universities will fall in the bracket of your grades. Some will be above it, some will be below it. You're going to grade all those universities in that same manner. The next thing is focus on their LNAT requirements. Do you want a lot of universities that ask for the test, or do you want more universities that don't ask for the test? Mention this requirement in your comparison sheet. After that, you delve deeper. Some universities you will be able to eliminate right at the stage. The next stage is where you look at the other features of living in that community, on that campus, in that location. Focus on those factors and focus on the cost of attendance and the cost of living. Both of these are very important. The kind of city you end up in is going to impact the expenses for you, right? So make a list of all of these factors, and this will help you narrow it down to, basically you will be crossing off about half of the universities on your list once you have all these criteria in front of you. The next thing is to think about the department and the faculty, the kind of placements and opportunities that students get from that campus. What has been the history of the last 5 to 10 years in terms of career outcomes for the students? What is the acceptance rate? Where should you place this college on your list in terms of acceptance? And what is the range of scores that they accept? Right? So these are the factors that will finally lead you to your short list. And out of the 5, what we usually recommend is that you have 1 dream university, 2 target universities, and 2 safety universities. Now, dream university is the place where you would love to go, but you're not sure if you can get in. You're still going to try. The next one target university is the one in which your profile matches the maximum categories. So the criteria is very close to your actual profile. Those are going to be your target universities, and safeties are the ones which are a little below your profile. But since you don't want to take a chance, you're going to have some safety universities in your profile as well, right? Now, in this entire list of criterias, ranking is one thing that I am not including, and there's a reason for that. Colleges are ranked in relation to each other. Colleges are not ranked in relation to your profile. That is something that you need to do. That's the distance that you need to walk. So students need to be very clear about what are their desires, what are their aspirations, and then they need to rank their colleges. Then they need to um, decide what would be the right place for them. So before you pull out the QS list, make sure that you're doing this research for yourself and then comparing it with what others say about those colleges, right? So, Jonathan, what would you like to add to the college listing part, and if there are any insights that you think the students might benefit?
Yeah, so there's two things I wanted to say. So the first is to reiterate what Pooja said. Rankings aren't the most important thing. They are influential, but they shouldn't be the determinative factor. Now, having said that, there is a really influential and useful website called the Guardian Rankings. So I'm just putting the link to that in the chat now, which is essentially the main source for UK university rankings. So don't use it as a Bible. It shouldn't be the only guide, but it might help you in your decision-making process. The second thing is about choosing between Oxford and Cambridge. So as Pooja mentioned earlier, you can only apply to one. They have that agreement. And so you might wonder, well, how do I choose between them? They're both really good universities. What's the difference? And there is one key difference between them in terms of the way they approach the law. So the Oxford undergraduate law course is very theoretical. So you approach law through a theoretical perspective. You'll be writing lots of essays. Cambridge also do teach the theory, but they have a significant focus on the practical application of that law. So a lot of the work you'll be doing in Cambridge will be, here's a one paragraph example of facts, which criminal offences have been committed, or, what causes of action might there be arising from that hypothetical fact pattern. So it's a practical application. So Oxford is theoretical. Cambridge has a bigger focus on the practical application of the law you learn. And so I think that should be important as an important consideration to work out which one you want to apply to.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
I
So
actually
now, go ahead.
just one point I was wanting to add along with all this. So excellent way of understanding what university you should be choosing and how you should be choosing, and what both Pooja and Jonathan said. I'd like to add one specific factor. Uh, we keep thinking about universities through our high school. Like all students are thinking, right from class 10, they're thinking of Oxford, Cambridge. We all had that dream. Mine was Shakespeare. When I studied Shakespeare, it was the time I knew which university I want to end up at. It didn't happen. Obviously, life took its turn. But one thing I think, in the current times, what has become very, very important for every student to understand, when you are ready to apply to the universities, and when you have thought through, with multiple YouTubes and your counselors and your parents and your elder cousins who have been to these universities, the whole point is that until unless you do not experience something personally, that is the changing factor, from that target to safety to including or not including a university. And how do we get that? Like sitting in India, obviously, college visit is a thing that you can do, but not everyone has the time and space to actually, fly down to UK. And if you can, great. That will be amazing. That inspiration comes from it when you're visiting college on visiting days and everything. But when you're sitting here right now in this season itself, once June and July we pass on from that time of the year, all these universities start with college fairs. They start with outreach activities with in different kinds of college fairs. There is QS, there is IC3, and there are so many different college fairs that are happening, which are open to students. This becomes a very important factor for everyone to attend, because you come to know of like how right now you're talking to Jonathan, and Jonathan is able to give a good idea of and the understanding of how Cambridge and Oxford works on a personal level. You will be able to interact with universities in these college fairs, which helps and changes decisions so many times. Time and again, I've seen so many of my students right from undergrad to MBA. They've changed decisions. They've been thinking about a university for 6 months, and then they realize, okay, the dream university I was thinking of was this. But after I visited and had a word and understood the factors in these webinars that I sat through of these universities, it changed my perspective. And this is the reason why I want to move to the other one. So this becomes a very important factor. You can always think and be sure of your universities when you're in, but 2 months, 3 months before you're ready to apply, visit. Visit these webinars, seminars, college fairs. They really give perspective to your decisions. It's very important. I think that is something that I would wanting to add. Otherwise, yes, everything that you guys have said perfectly
Yeah, that
right.
makes a lot.
Yeah. All right. I think I'll take on Jonathan on this just to give a little perspective to people, those who are still thinking about law. Because, as an Indian and as a person who started to think about law when I was in my class 9th and 10th, that's when I started to prepare for my CLAT and I went for my law school, decided on my law school. The idea, and this is like 15 years ago, 17 years ago, but the idea I still see in lawyers and people who are wanting to pursue law is very specific. It's very streamlined. They think on only three perspectives. Either it's corporate law and you become one of the corporate lawyers in one big MNCs or big Indian colleges, Indian big four or big six colleges, or you go into the criminal litigation or civil litigation, and you work through in the chambers of people, those who are sitting in Supreme Court, High Court, and with big lawyers. You work with them, right? Or you go into the NGO sector where you are helping and doing things. And one thing that more that has come up is the think tanks. That you can also think about think tanks after your law. But what people are not very clear on, and what understanding that comes along with, that there are so many different fields after law that you can actually think about, and it's not just one or two. And I've only written down few of them here on my screen because that was the limitation. There is so much more. So the question that I had, and I think Jonathan would be very, Jonathan, you'll be able to answer this. Uh, Doing graduation yourself, and you and your peers you've studied with started off at the same point, but now that you have graduated, you all must be in different fields. Can you shed a little light on the different fields your friends and your peers have taken on after finishing graduation and all?
Yeah, of course. So as well as the different subject areas of law that you could go into, and I'll come back to that in a minute, I think it's important to recognise at first there's two different types of lawyers in the UK. There's solicitors and then there's barristers. And solicitors usually work in teams in the offices, and barristers will be the ones who are presenting the case in court. So in America, you have a solicitor advocate, essentially merging solicitor and barrister together. It's important to recognise in the UK, there is a clear distinction between those two roles. And I think with my peers, about 50% go down the solicitor route and the other 50% go down the barrister route. But even within that split, there's such a diverse range of things that you can do. You could work in the City of London, helping big companies sort out their legal issues. You could travel abroad and be, let's say, a legal advisor to the European Union or a particular government minister who's trying to engage in international affairs. You could do pro bono work, so helping those who can't afford to pay for a lawyer. So this might be in the realm of criminal law or employment law or even human rights law. And increasingly, there's an emphasis on the international dimension. So international environmental law and international human rights law, say. So I mentioned, the Middle East conflict, and there's also the Ukraine conflict. There's lots of interesting international law questions that arise from those events. And you may or may not be aware that 3 months ago, the European Court of Justice put down a ruling to do with climate change, where a group of women from Sweden, I think it was,
Yeah.
They won their case against the government, that the government hadn't done enough to combat climate change. And then the question is, what implications does that have for government policy? Is there meant to be this overlap between law and politics this much? And so you can see, just through what I've said in the last minute or so, there are so many different types of law that you could engage with. And really, the critical thinking skills that you develop at a top UK law university will enable you to do any of those. And when you study law, you'll touch on all of these areas, and then you can specialize in what you want to do the most. But because you've developed these critical thinking skills, you can jump between specializations throughout your life, and you can, take your work to the areas that you enjoy. I think that's the best thing about law, that you have these skills that you develop, but you can look at it in any subject area, really, that you could possibly imagine. And so if you're really interested in gaming, let's say, you could be a lawyer and then, enter the world of cyber law. And so you can take law into any area, and that's the best thing about it. It's so flexible and so versatile.
Yeah, I think that actually sums it up quite well. You start with critical thinking and understanding, and you specialize as you go forward and as you interact with it. I think that summarizes it quite well, that there is no limitation to it, and it's very flexible that way. That's very, very apt. I think moving on to all these factors of how you get in, what are the experiences you might gain, and what are the areas you will be able to sit through and experience. One important factor comes for any Indian applicant who's applying to UK for their graduation in law is what comes after. Because sadly, how social media works is more on misinformation, and it thrives on that. And the whole reason why people are getting viral is because of misinformation. The more confused the people, the better social media is. This is one reason why research on understanding where you are going to end up a year later, 3 years later after graduation is important more than anything else. It's not just about research about which college and which course, but also about what happens after that. Recently, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and we were just talking about where they are working in UK, and they are trying to build an entire community of lawyers, those who are doing LLM in UK, and how the Indians who are coming in, even after finishing that, they're not very clear how exactly things are supposed to function. So understanding the entire visa situation, entire work situation, completely heavily depends on the research and understanding of those things. Now, just to brush up on a little bit of what the current situation is and how things are working, there are two specific pathways through which any student who graduates in UK right now. So the first one is your PSW, that is post-study work visa, right? The graduate route. The eligibility is that you get 2 years after your graduation to be able to stay back in UK and work there. There is no limitations on the jobs, any skills. You just need a sponsor. That somebody somewhere you have already. And the more important question is that this is not something that you will just get. The more important question is how do you do that? It's the work that you will be putting in your 3 years of graduation with networking, with internships, with everything. That is what is going to make it clear that you will be able to avail the PSW after your graduation. It becomes very important that you are working through your entire college years to be able to reach that. I think this is one thing that gets very difficult for people to consume. That okay, I don't think I'll be able to cross that barrier and reach to a point where I'll be able to work. You need to work through your college. And the other factor, the other pathway other than PSW is your SQE, Solicitor's Qualifying Exam. So once you are able to do that, you're completing your SQ1 and SQ2 exams, along with 2 years of qualifying work experience that you need to have after you have graduated. It will help you stay back in the UK to be able to be a solicitor after that. Other than that, skilled worker visa and temporary work visa, these are more for people, those who are in India or in other parts of the world where they're wanting to enter UK. They do it through after getting jobs. So that is not something that is very much concerned with a student who's doing their undergrad in UK and then wanting to work. So the two specific visas that you should be concerned about is your SQE and PSW. So this is something that you need to be very, very clear about, and you need to be prepared about before you have even started. I think that brings us to to an end of a detailed discussion of what all factors you need to keep in mind and things that you will be confronted with as you start to apply. So as we had given out our posts on different platforms, we got certain questions that were asked of you, Jonathan, and us as well. We'll try to cover those, but I'd like to open the floor to everyone in the audience. If somebody has any questions specifics to what we have talked about or anything that you're thinking about for Jonathan or for us, we'd like you to raise your hands and go ahead with asking that. And once we are done with that, then we'll try to pick up these questions instead.
Feel free to use the mic or the chat box to post your comments. We have somebody. Yes, Ayushi, please go ahead.
Hi. First of all, thanks for such an informative session. It was great to, get the insights. I
Thank you,
have a
Ayushi.
question for Jonathan. If he could tell me more about, what is a day for a student in Cambridge? So how does it feel to have? Maybe he can just describe a day, a general day as a student there.
Yeah, of course. So in the morning, you might have some lectures. So these will be in the big cohort of the entire year group. So you might have 2 or 3 hours of lectures in the morning on whatever's on the syllabus at that time. But then the bulk of the day is reading, a lot of reading. You'll be reading textbooks, you'll be reading articles, you'll be reading judgments of the courts as well. And it takes quite a while to read them, and it's a very workload intensive part of what you do. And then to top off the reading, when you've kind of finished the lectures and the reading for a particular unit, you'll have what's called in Cambridge a supervision. In Oxford, they're called tutorials. So this will be a group of 2, 3, maybe 4 students, and you sit down with a leading academic in that field for an hour, and you'll discuss what you've learned. They can brush up on any issues you didn't quite understand. You'll go through some mock questions together. And so it's the lecture, reading, supervision trio that makes up the learning in Cambridge. And once you've gone through that for a particular module, you'll just do it again. And so, yeah, it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot of work to do. And the bulk of it is the reading. So you've got to be disciplined and organized with your time.
Okay, thanks. Just a follow-up thing. Did you at any point of time felt, burned out by so much research day in, day out?
I don't think I've ever felt burnt out. It certainly is tricky to start with because you've never studied law before, likely. If you're doing engineering or maths, then you've come across these sorts of concepts before. Now, of course, it's more difficult now. You already know something about that area. With law, it's completely fresh. And so it's very difficult at the start to get your head around the type of thinking they require of you. But I never felt burnt out because there's sufficient opportunity to take breaks and to manage your own time if you wish.
Okay, that's quite insightful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ayushi. I think I'd like to add to this. So I got this question from a student last year when I was doing applications for my students, and she had a question that does the reading ever stop? So so I had to very sadly tell her that the wrong profession you're looking at, because a lawyer never stops reading. It's their life. You end your life with that. So that goes on. All right, I think Rishi, you also have a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, he has posted that in the chat box. So Rishi is asking, are there any books, websites, or resources you would recommend for someone interested in studying law?
Yeah, so the main thing I'd recommend is to start by looking at the university website. So if you Google Cambridge undergraduate law degree, then their main website for the undergrad law course will come up. And on one of the links on that page, there will be a suggested reading section. and you can go onto that. They'll have 20, 30 books or articles that give you a taster. You don't have to read it all by any means, but choose the few that seem the most interesting, and that will give you, a really interesting idea of what it's like to study law. And in particular, there is one book called What About Law, which I've just put in the chat. And that's a really interesting book written by 4 Cambridge professors together, who give you an insight into one of the most important cases in 7 or 8 areas in law. And that gives you a real flavor of the type of things that you might come across.
Right. I think that really helps out. I think most of these questions are basically either answered through the webinar or right now, but there are 2 questions at the end that talks about Indian law. I'll quickly just rush over them and for people who watch maybe later as well.
Arshna, there is one question in the chat box from Viraj. Let's quickly address that. So Viraj is asking, how can I choose between Cambridge's land economy and Oxford's jurisprudence?
Okay, so there's 3 separate degrees we're talking about here. You've got the Oxford Law course, the Cambridge Law course, and the Cambridge Land Economy course. So I've already mentioned the difference between Oxford and Cambridge Law. Oxford's theoretical, Cambridge has a greater focus on the practical elements. Now, Cambridge's Land Economy course is a mix of law, geography, and economics. So some of the modules you study on that course will be similar to the Cambridge Law degree, but most of them will be different. So if you do have an interest in law, but you don't want to study only law, and you might wish to study maybe an economicsy take on law, or how law can be used in kind of a geography context, so maybe more environmental type law, then the Cambridge Land Economy course does provide that sort of mix. It kind of gives you a flavour of a few areas, allowing you to specialise kind of after your degree in any one you wish.
I hope, Viraj, that answers your question. All right, perfect. All right, just quick 2 questions on Indian law and Indian colleges. So one was asked that what are the top law schools in India that would and what makes them stand out? So I think that's a very okay. We have another question, but I'll just cover this up. It's actually a very straightforward answer. There are two variations of universities in India, like anywhere else, public and private. The public universities rank the highest in the country with their the kind of application they have towards law and application they have towards practice of law. That is your national law universities, and the top 5 national law universities, that is your Bangalore, Hyderabad, Kolkata, and Gujarat. There's one in Gujarat, I'm forgetting the name of it. These are the top 5 universities that are there in the national law universities. Other than that, in the private sector, you have Kriya, you have Ashoka, you have Jindal, which is doing quite well. But definitely, if you are planning on doing it from India, the first preference should be, okay, the one I missed out was NLU Delhi. That's, again, it's a debate that is Bangalore higher or Delhi higher. So that is whole there. But if you're wanting to practice law from India or wanting to study from India, National Law University is the place you should be at. It has a very direct paper, that is your LNAT. You give that, you get the score. The higher you are, the better. It's a very straightforward matter. There is no profile, there is no preschool academics and the entire having critical thinking and those things required in it. CLAT is a very straightforward paper. You prepare for a few months, you give it, you get the score, and you get it. You just need to clear your school exams. It doesn't even, there is a criteria that you need to be at a 90% or 95% for national law universities. Although when you move towards Jindal, things change. There is a little bit more to the application, but that is something that you can research a little bit about. But CLAT is going to be a very important factor for studying law in India. And what makes these universities the best universities in the country is so the most of the country's think tanks, that is companies or organizations that are supporting the ministers making and deciding and changing laws. the companies that are working on that, the NGOs that are working on that, all the lawyers, all the big lawyers that are coming into to these think tanks are coming from the big law, the top 5, top 7 law universities in the country. They are actually working, and even the top 6 law firms that are there in the country, they go for campus placements to these particular universities. So yes, in India, the difference is that you get a campus placement that happens, and these universities are preferred by the market that way. So that makes them way better. And also the application, how they are teaching and how they are applying and how they are mixing the whole theoretical and practical aspects into within your law studies, that becomes a very big factor. Why they are on the top of the game. I think we have one more question from Ikma Isaya. Let's say I study engineering biology in Ghana. How do I branch to study law in the UK?
So
Jonathan, would you like to
there
hear?
are, yeah, happy to do this one. So there's two ways to do it. So the first and probably the simplest one is you can study the law conversion course in the UK. This is called the PGDL, and that's just the law conversion course that almost every university offers. So it's a 1-year course, and you have to successfully complete an undergraduate degree elsewhere, and then you can branch into the PGDL, and that'll allow you to practice as a lawyer in the UK. The second way, the slightly longer way, would be just restarting and doing a law undergraduate degree afresh. That'll be 3 years, so slightly longer. So yeah, most people do the PGDL instead.
And that actually goes not just for Ghana, that goes for anywhere in the world. If you have finished
Yeah.
your graduation, you can move over to UK to do PGDL. All right. Ikma, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so this brings us to the end of the webinar. And thank you everyone for joining us.